Good morning, Carbondale and everywhere else in the community of Southern Illinois. This is Benny and Aaron on Beyond the Binary.
Beyond the Binary, WDBX 91.1 FM, Southern Illinois Community Radio.
Yes, where we talk about transgender news.
Transgender news, politics, cultural production, and all things intersecting with gender, particularly transgender bodies and embodiment.
There Excellent. You go.
So where are we going to start today?
Well, we're going to start by listening to Against Me, Laura Jean Grace. And could you remind me of that song title?
Yeah, absolutely. It's True Trans Soul Rebel, and we played an Against Me song a few weeks ago, which was Transgender Dysphoria Blues. So this one's called True Trans Soul Rebel. We also have the link on our Facebook right now, facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. A correction to our email, it's not BTB Radio, it's BTheBRadio@gmail.com. Our explicit bad. But Against Me is offering free downloads to their latest two singles on their internet website. So that is linked to our Facebook. But this is one of those songs from their website.
Let's do it. That was Against Me, specifically the singer Laura Jane Grace, a recently out transgender woman that is part of that punk group.
That's right. We're going to start. We actually have a lot of news to get through today. This has been a huge week in terms of trans news media, things that are going on, discussions. And so the first thing I want to talk about deals with a book that's going to be coming out. I believe the prospective date is October 13th, 2013. It's a book by Sheila Jeffries, a gender theorist, scholar from Australia. The book is called Gender Hurts, A Feminist Analysis of Transgenderism. Now, this is the issue with Sheila Jeffries. Sheila Jeffries is part of this kind of group of academic scholar activists who are very transphobic. Sheila Jeffries specifically refers to transsexual surgeries as human rights violations, has referred to it as children eugenics, as well as McCarthyism or forms of McCarthyism. And Sheila Jeffries explicitly uses the wrong gender pronouns for trans people when talking about them. And so from the outset, her work is already questioned. It's something that I'm really not looking forward to. And there were a handful of folks who work out of Trans Advocate, an online media news source, who wrote a letter to the editor or the publisher at Routledge, who's going to be publishing this text. And the editor wrote the following back. At the top of our criteria in assessing suitability for publication is content that meets the highest standards of academic scholarship. Sheila Jeffries is an established, albeit sometimes controversial, scholar. Her proposal was subjected to multiple peer review, and we are confident on the basis of the scholarly feedback and the author's track record that it should be published. The manuscript will be subject to rigorous peer review process.
It's frightening.
And from there the letter kind of goes on like that the book should be handled in the regular academic way, which is to say other people publish, so it keeps the publication machine going. Part of the academic side of me says absolutely, yes, this is how it's supposed to be. And then there's the trans part of me and the activist part of me that says it's scary, right? Like there's a part of me that's like I don't want to read it. Like it's hard to want to read this type of stuff and to call it feminist analysis.
That's even the scarier part about this is that they're identifying it through radical feminism, or just feminism in general. And
and the letters that get sent to this letter in particular, there's a whole outrage around this letter because the people who wrote it, they had sent to the Routledge editor, they had sent the wrong draft, and in this wrong draft, which was a rough draft of the letter, they had misspelled Sheila Jeffries' names, and so the radfem trolls, transphobic trolls, who those particular radfems, radical feminists. Fought back and vehemently online attacked this letter and this trans particular group and Trans Advocate for attacking Sheila Jeffries for censorship, all this stuff,
spelling her name wrong,
as opposed to engaging in dialogue, which these radfem groups, which I know that you've had some interesting run-ins with yourself, they clamor around folks like Janice Raymond, like Sheila Jeffries, because for them these are the academics who espouse the stuff that they need to hear in order to justify these positions, which unfortunately rad femme trolls tend to just attack as opposed to engage in dialogue. And it's shrouded as some sort of debate when it's not really. It's using wrong pronouns, it's attacking people for character. It's quite upsetting. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but I want to put that out there, and I'm going to track this book as it comes out in a couple months.
Yeah, thank you for even bringing that to the show today.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really frightening. It's really frightening new information. It's definitely scary, and it's definitely something that I will be interested in seeing it progress and learning about it.
That book will be in our house.
Yeah, because I mean,
will be reading it.
You will be, after all.
I will. It's difficult, right? Knowing that this is going to be something that's going to be dangerous, and
I also want to know what they're talking about. I mean,
absolutely.
They're talking about my body.
Yeah.
I want to know how they're talking about it.
Absolutely.
It's really remarkable to me
Let's go ahead and move into the Chicago house.
Okay.
Something we missed last week, unfortunately, because it came out after we left the studio last week.
Okay, well, the Chicago house, I knew this. I know about this because it kind of came about because shelters, homeless shelters and such, were not really knowing what to do with transgender patrons or transgender folks that were coming into the shelters because they just didn't know where to place them. They were basically avoiding them, and as we know, transgender people make up quite a large part of the homeless population, sadly. So here, on Monday, Chicago House cut the ribbon on the Trans Life Center, a first in the nation's facility for members of the transgender community to locate in Chicago's Edgewater neighborhood. It's housing, health, and employment services in a discrimination-free space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a space where trans people can go, homeless trans people in specific. A homeless shelter for us to be included, which is absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely.
It's located in a former AIDS hospice operated by Chicago Health. TLC's exact location is being kept private to protect its occupants.
Sure. I mean, you don't want to have a space that says exactly what the address is, because part of these houses is you don't know what level or degree of outness someone is. And so keeping these spaces, even AIDS hospices, actual location secret is part of the safety, particularly if these are people who have left dangerous, violent situations at home, who maybe need to get away from a violent partner, who need to get away from a violent family. This could be one of the few and only safe spaces where that person can begin or continue their transition as they're trying to get to some other side of whatever that transition might look like, so that they can somehow access work, access some sort of labor in some capacity. So yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, they are, as I said, offering housing, health, and employment services. I think this is pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that these things weren't being offered to trans folks in general. At every homeless shelter, at any shelter, at a women's center, anywhere, that there has to be a separate space. So it's kind of a little bittersweet, you know? It's fabulous that we have this space now operating, and there's a place for trans folks to go to feel safe, which I think if that's a specific need, you never know as a trans person, should I go? Because a lot of trans folks are used to facing discrimination wherever we go, that it's kind of nice to have a space that we know no matter what is going to be accepting without as many obstacles, excuse me.
And and that's the bittersweet kind of double-edged sword here of any marginal community, I believe, right? That on one end we want, and I'm saying we as this kind of broad sense, I'm not speaking for, but as an individual, I guess, I'll just say that I want access to these separatist safe spaces, but at the same time, that does not fix the broader problem of the system itself. And so, in one end, right, like these safe spaces are necessary, even though there's no such thing as an always safe space. It's always relative. It is, at least in terms of gender, this Chicago safe house, a relative space for people to work through their transition.
Yeah, and we hope, though, too, that Edgewater is setting, an example for other cities.
And it looks like that's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to set an example. This is huge in terms of nationally. According to the story, it's the only of its kind in the U.S. So it's certainly setting some sort of trend. So
yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a non-profit organization, and it's really hoping to make a difference for trans folks that are homeless, or that are looking for a safe space to be. The ribbon has been cut, and by the first resident of the house, so it is open, it is running, and that is really exciting.
Cool. Let's go ahead and move to you have the next story, I believe, regarding Orange is the New Black.
Oh, Orange is the New Black. If you have Netflix and you're not watching Orange is the New Black, you are certainly missing out.
If you don't, go to your friend's house and
watch it there. Yeah, force them to watch it with you.
That's right. Not violently, of course.
Not non-violent force.
A friendly nudge. Strong suggestions to watch.
Already have the popcorn with you. It's a pretty great show. I really am enjoying it. We were kind of hesitant about it at first, but what's really exciting about the show is that Orange is the New Black is featuring Laverne Fox. Right?
What's that? Well,
is that her name? I'm just trying to.
No. It's highlighted there, I think, on the second page. But before we get there, I kind of want to say like a few things. There's a lot of critique and talking around the show going around. Wonderful. I believe Netflix got 14 Emmys. I don't know how many of those Emmy nominations were for Orange is the New Black. Maybe all of them. I'm not exactly sure. But part of what's so interesting about this show is it's one of the few where women's sexuality is taken seriously in terms of self-empowerment. And by that, what I mean is that these are women who challenge, in terms of representation, tend to challenge the ways in which they're able to kind of control their sexuality. And so that tends to be kind of where the productive component of it is. At the same time, though, the show draws upon racist scripts, and so we have bodies of color, particularly black women, who are eroticized, hyper-eroticized, in ways that the white bodies are not. And I think that Yasmin Ayers has a wonderful blog about this, and I think that it's really advantageous and efficacious for you all to maybe go check that out. We will link it to our Facebook later this afternoon.
Sure.
A really nice critique about kind of that difference. While sexuality is and queerness is certainly, as she says, gets an A, racialized stereotypes and representation certainly get an F. And that's something to really consider. So while, yes, we want to praise representation of the character Sophia Burst.
Well, that's the character. Her name is Laverne Fox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that she is. She's playing she's a transgender character in the show named Sophia Bursett, but she's actually a transgender woman, and she's the first transgender woman of color to actually be, performing as a transgender woman in the media.
As her own distinct character that has speaking lines, as opposed to maybe a background character in a filmic representation.
So we kind of applaud this whole thing happening. It's really exciting.
I think it's real exciting to at least track her as a character. I mean, there's a few things on the second page there where they actually track some of the ways in which she as a character kind of challenges very specific stereotypes in very interesting ways.
Yeah, Sophia ultimately rejects the offer to seek out alternative means of trans survival. This powerful plot twist is extremely notable in a climate that assumes that trans women of color are innately prone to sex work as the only avenue of survival. That is true. And you have to watch the show. We're not gonna. I don't want to give off too many spoilers here, but the show in general is, I think, representing trans folks as a trans woman myself in such a beautiful way.
Sure, and I think that one of the particular moments there is that in order for Sophia to get what she needs, there's an offer to have some sort of relations, if you will, with one of the prison guards. And she turns down the prison guard and walks away. And so there's a way of saying, oh, okay, well, this is a different way in which this trans woman of color is going about what she needs, which is to say we ultimately see that she uses intellect as opposed to body. and how it doesn't always have to fall back on body exclusively as the means to get what it is that one needs.
And we're not being anti-sex work in any way.
No,
we're
not
mostly...
It's that representation confines. This is a different way to represent that we have not seen, and so it's very exciting to see a different way, the unpredictable path, kind of unfold for this character.
Exactly. This is really, really exciting for me, because we're so used to seeing trans folks in the media being represented in such an unfortunate way.
Yeah.
That is always, worth criticizing, and I'm sure, for some folks, there are certainly movies that I watched with featuring trans people, of course not played by trans people like Laverne Fox, that I got something out of it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it, and, as I criticize it, it's definitely offensive. The portrayal is not accurate. It's very much based off these stereotypes. And, it's just really interesting watching this really play out.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move into this interesting other story here, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, there is... Okay, I'm just going to kind of read through this. This has been cited in a few different places. I'm just going to read it directly off of the web source here, which I got this from Think Progress, but it's been posted in a lot of places. The American Family Association, by the way, total evil empire organization. The American Family Association, One News Now, a family that is this is what they say according to them, a family that is supporting their transgender child should be investigated for child abuse.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely awful. And this was in support of the Liberty Council, another evil empire organization. One of their reps, Matt Barber, had said, basically Matt Barber was working against or speaking out against a family that was featured in the Washington Post. And this family came from Maryland, and this family was supporting their trans child, a 6-year-old named Tyler, who was living as a boy and was thriving living as a boy, as opposed to how he was identified and assigned as a girl 6 years prior at his birth.
Just crazy to me.
Yes, and this is the direct quote that Barber says.
Okay. Let's do it.
In order to be hip and cool and trendy to facilitate this gender confusion, and then to even prepare this baby for hormone abuse, to try to stall the onset of puberty, and to pump testosterone into this child is nothing short of child abuse. I have 3 children. They demand lots of things, and I tell them no. And I explain to them why it is not in their best interests to have every demand. And ultimately, he says at the end, parents need to learn how to parent.
As if being transgender is like a misbehavior, or is like an activity that they want to do, like stay up late or something.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous to hear. This is obviously someone who is very ignorant, and either ignorant or sadly educated and thinks they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are. They are intelligently transphobic, and they quote people like Sheila, whatever, or
Sheila Jeffries. Yeah, absolutely.
It's
great example.
sad.
Yeah.
It's scary because this is clearly, and I don't know what other information they're getting. I mean, this child is clearly thriving in the gender that they're supposedly taking on as an identity. I don't know why we're calling it boy necessarily right away. I mean, sure, we can assume this person is going to identify as trans. I mean, they're 6 years old.
And that's the thing, right? Because we don't know about young kids who are dealing with gender dysphoria. They could grow up to be trans, they could grow up to be gay, they could grow up to be nothing.
I just want to say, this is my whole hesitation with how we throw the limelight on children. We're outing them, we're making this clearly just an unsafe situation. But it's always my hesitation, because of course we want to have children in a way representing the trans community to show that yes, this is clearly happening at an early age. It's just because, of course, we're not being taken seriously when we tell our stories, right?
Well, it's
when we have these direct accounts, we have to realize we're putting children at risk. We're throwing them on, under the microscope. Mm-hmm. For one, we're outing them instantly, and it's really frightening to see. I know that I definitely would not have wanted this as a child, to have my entire personal struggle be basically
aired out there, sure.
Aired on television.
And that itself might be the gender or the child abuse component. But I think that like what's really important here, well, that's an important dynamic to consider, is the fact that this is a hate group, let's call it what it is, who frames the ability to let a child express him or herself however they want to as child abuse. As if to say the parent knows what's best, as opposed to maybe the child knows what's best in terms of gender expression. Tons of people are going to disagree with this, but this is usually people who disagree that are not trans themselves, as if to say that a normal, quote-unquote, gender expression is the way to be.
Maybe
the way to be isn't that binaric way. Maybe the way to be for that particular individual is a different way. And stifling that possibility is exactly where you're disallowing that person to unfold or experience their life the way that they already do. Right? And I feel like it's just such an interesting rhetorical strategy that's being used to frame this as child abuse. Because as child abuse, it opens up a whole new slew of legal precedent against parenting, wrong parenting. And
it's so upsetting. And I hope it's not unexciting here that Absolutely. We don't really play the devil's advocate at all. Because we both agree this is disgusting. This critical way. This calling it child abuse it's horrible, because I, as a trans woman myself, really wish that I was able to explore my gender more as a kid. I was constantly shamed for wanting to dress up or, wear clothes that I wanted to do or belong with, of course, the girls. And I just wish that I could have had the experience of a parent that would have accepted my more
it's interesting because this is an interesting transition here to our next story, which you have about the new California legislation. And to be clear, the article that we pulled here is actually a political commentary that doesn't agree with the bill. So
and this is about this goes on about the whole debate over trans children basically wanting to use facilities that correctly and accurately represent the gender identity that they are taking on, such as restrooms, gym locker rooms, what have you. So this bill is passing to kind of enforce laws that are already set that say that yes, a child can use a locker room that they want to, and that not that they just want to, but that represents their chosen gender identity.
Yeah.
And we have, of course, people critiquing it, saying that there are going to be children that would not want someone of a male biology. Specifically, they say girls that may not want.
Well, that's exactly how they frame these bills. What's this bill? Now, this is in California. I believe it's AB 1266. Is that the number?
Yeah, it's AB 1266 would direct schools to ignore biology and let children decide how they want to self-identify. No student, including elementary school pupils, would need his or her parents' permission to change gender identity, which is how it definitely should be.
Well, that's the thing, is that what's being ascribed here, part of the fear is that's written into this political commentary piece here is that little girls are going to be worried that little boys, and that's already wrongly gendering the children, right, by calling them little boys.
Yeah.
That little girls are going to be afraid of little boys being in the restroom. Well, that is part of the gender ascription. That's part of the gender fear that's been put into individuals to believe that there's going to be a problem there in the first place.
What we're doing is encouraging this frightening separation and perpetuating, what we call this whole, all biological males are inherently perpetrators of sexual violence,
right.
of stalking, of peeping. We perpetuate this in the media, we push. I mean, this is critical, of course, that we kind of push this on our boys, and this is a way that we are assuming these gender stereotypes. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that we are kind of...
Well, the thing is this. For me, yes, absolutely. And I think what ends up happening is not only is it perpetuating these stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
Because statistically and realistically there is real, right? Women are experience sexual violence by men. Men are the ones who are perpetuating sexual violence. Yes, absolutely.
Right.
But part of the problem here when we talk about trans people is that narrative dismisses the fact that these trans girls are already girls. They're already girls. And so what it's also doing is it refuses to acknowledge that these are women and instead keeps calling them boys. instead of teaching the cis girls that this is a different way of being a girl. This is a different type of girl body. And in fact, the picture that gets depicted, it's not in what I printed here, is this traditionally dressed boy standing at a sink in a mirror with these two girls kind of washing their hands like, get away from me, as opposed to, this is a different way of being a girl.
Right, yeah.
And so, on one end, yes, absolutely, it's perpetuating the stereotype, but it also, at the same time, it also erases the little girl's identity as a girl.
So you're just saying they're just being transphobic, too?
Absolutely. I think that
So we're seeing a lot of problems here. We're seeing these gender stereotypes being perpetuated, and we're also seeing transphobia.
Now, we are already at 9:30. I think it's time for a song, a quick little voice break for you and I. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Okay.
What are we going to play today?
Today we're going to play a song by Fox Giselle, and Fox Giselle is a hip-hop artist, and this song is from her latest album called Elevation.
Yeah.
That's really it. In my reading of the song, she's talking about dealing with dysphoria in some capacity and learning how to elevate yourself.
Let's play it.
Okay.
All right, and we're back. That was Fox Giselle, Elevation.
Elevation. Yeah. All right. We just got news that turns out we will be on the air again this afternoon from 4 to 5:30. How about that?
Yeah, this is, by the way, if you're just tuning in, Beyond the Binary.
Beyond the Binary.
Benny and Aaron.
Hi. I'm going to be performing the role of Benny today.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
You can email us at betheberadio@gmail.com, as well as visit us on facebook.com/Beyond the Binary.
There you go.
I have the next story here. This is a bit of tragedy, which we all know that not all news can be happy news, and in fact, some of the most hard-hitting, necessary news is some of the more difficult news. There has been... last Wednesday, there was a police report of a body wrapped in a plastic bag, and Philadelphia police have arrested Charles Sargent for the murder of a trans woman. The woman was killed with a hatchet and screwdriver. The body parts of the victim were found in a vacant lot. Sargent supposedly had an axe, screwdriver, and a knife in his possession when arrested. While in custody, Sargent admitted to this crime, and the victim has been identified as Diamond Williams. There's speculation as to whether Williams and Sargent were in a romantic relationship or not. There's still news to be uncovered there.
Okay.
But Sargent is currently in custody, and it's good and bad. Remember, we also deal with this kind of what does it mean, Sargent being a black man, what does it mean for a body of color in general to be in prison and be part of the prison industrial complex? What does that do for rehabilitation versus incarceration and therefore removal of life? And so I'm kind of stuck in this weird space as usual. But I thought it important that we mention when news like this does surface, certainly.
Of course.
So let's go ahead and turn to from Philadelphia to Church Falls, Virginia, I think. Is that the name of the city? Yeah. Which you have here.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Do it.
Okay, well, this article is titled Nova Salud Hosts Transgendered Fashion Show, which is always exciting. Apparently, this Nova Salud is a group that tries to fight the stigma surrounding AIDS as well as promote prevention education. So this is about trans folks, Saturday night's transgender fashion show in Falls Church, Virginia, trans folks being able to put on a little fashion show. They say it is full of sparkles, silk, and a little bit of skin. The models were in different stages of their transition, and many of them have overcome obstacles as a transgendered person. This is nice. This is always great to hear about because, it's a place where people can really just exercise their identity. And former Navy SEAL Kristen Beck served as the mistress of ceremonies. She has received a lot of attention lately after making the public decision to become a woman.
Which we talked about Kristen Beck, remember the Navy SEAL representation. She was the one who was shown in a picture real burly in Afghanistan with a big old beard.
Is that transgender warrior princess?
Yeah, her.
Okay.
Yeah, that was her, Kristen Beck. So she was the master of
So
ceremonies.
can I quote her here?
Oh, yeah.
I spent 20 years in basically the toughest of the tough, the Navy SEALs, a pretty rugged organization. So after 20 years of that, I'm a little older, a little more experienced. I want to start trying to live my life in happiness and peace with myself. I always had this internal struggle being transgender, so right now I'm going to start trying to live happy, Beck says. How great. This is great news. So they host a transgender fashion show. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that's that little bit of exciting,
Well, that kind of
more
connects,
uplifting news.
and that kind of connects in an interesting way because part of fashion shows, this fashion show talks about how the contestants, I don't know if they're winners or whatnot, maybe it's just a show in general, but all the participants, maybe is a better word, were all in various stages of their transition.
Right,
of
correct.
course, as we also know and validate on this show, there's no such thing as ultimate, like, I've made it transition. It's always a process, right? And it's different for different types of people. Experiences of being out are gradated.
Yeah, a lot of questions facing trans folks is when are you done transitioning? And some people have an answer to that. I like to personally say that I won't ever really be done.
You're right.
No.
And there's this on Huffington Post Gay Voices, there was a piece written called The Many Shades of Out. And there's been some dialogue surfacing about going stealth, and going stealth would be a term used for those who pass as normative gender or as cisgender and don't refer to or discuss being trans. And so it's stealth in this very literally, I'm stealth, I disappear into the mainstream.
There's a lot of pressure to be stealth, whether it's the constant news stories of trans folks being murdered, such as the one we just shared.
And with this fashion show, same thing, right? That with participating in this, there's a certain degree of what is your level of outness? How do you put yourself into the limelight? There's a lot of these politics, and this connects us to these next two stories. The first one is this piece I'm talking about in HuffPost Gay Voices, where a trans woman is reflecting on Lynn Conway, who's reflecting on her work in and around the White House as an out trans woman who began her transition back in 1968, I believe she says here. So it's been a while. Yeah, 1968.
Wow.
And she's looking around this room during LGBT History Month where the president comes out to speak. And she says, quote, "And it hit me, we've come so far, so fast, that ever so many others could begin shedding old habits too. After all, freedom isn't just an external concept framed by our laws. It's a gift of the spirit that we must give ourselves, in this case, by going towards brighter shades of out. Bottom line, if you want to change the future, start living as if you're already there."
That's pretty optimistic.
Well, yeah, right. So there's kind of this yes and for me, I feel like, yes, that's true.
Is she white?
It's also, yes.
I'm only asking that because we were just reading, Laverne Fox's understanding of being a trans woman of color and how white supremacy kind of navigates that. We see a lot of trans women of color being murdered. This is clearly a move forward for white people, right?
I don't know if it's necessarily just that. It's a matter of who has access to the means to transition in the way that you want so that you may go out. And sure, she calls it many shades of out, but then at the same time isn't really validating that sometimes the outness isn't out at all. And
Sure.
so it can be I think that a piece like this can be read as naive or a privileged stance. Privilege is always relative, sure, but in terms of yes, live as though it's the future, well, sure, but there's also the reality of the material consequence of being out in certain circumstances can get you hurt.
And it's and being out and being black, or in general being of color, is going to be very different than being out as a white person. Laverne Fox actually really specifically talked about this during her transition and how she noted specifically that she was mostly being policed. Of course she criticized us through white supremacy by other black bodies, but those black bodies weren't necessarily quick to publicly humiliate or what have you trans folks that are white or gender non-conforming folks
Laverne Cox?
Yeah, Laverne Fox.
Cox. C-O-X.
I'm pretty sure it's Fox. Are you reading Cox? Yeah?
Yeah, Laverne, it's right here.
I know. Okay, I saw that, and then I saw Fox. So we're gonna correct this little.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay, so anyhow, yeah, and we haven't really explicitly got to this particular article from the Advocate, but yeah, about the transition that. Actually, here, let me read some interesting quotes by Laverne. It's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
It really kind of puts.
Let me settle this. I'm gonna look up her name.
I'm gonna read this while you do that.
Okay.
When I was attempting to live part-time in boy drag, I was hyper-aware of how perceptions of black masculinity influence the ways in which people behave in relationship to a body in the public space. I noticed how much harder it was to get a taxi, for example, when I was dressed in boy drag, as opposed to when I was dressed as myself. In black male drag, I noticed white women cross to the other side of the street and clutch their purses tighter. When I was perceived as a black man, I became a threat to public safety. When I was dressed as myself, it was my safety that was threatened. It was usually other black people who policed my gender, called me out, or made fun of me on subways, street corners, and in delicatessens. I believe it is because I am also black that I became their target. These same folks would often ignore white, trans, and gender non-conforming folks in the same spaces, even those who passed, even less than I did at the time. Systemic racism not only encourages the state and non-black individuals to police and monitor black bodies, white supremacy encourages other black folks to do so as well. So this article in The Advocate is really, really, I think, an important addition about like what it means, like this relative space of being out, literal different shades of being out, what one can kind of afford. And this turns me to an article that was posted in The Atlantic.
Let me first just.
Oh, sure.
You'll stand corrected here. It is Laverne Cox.
I will stand. You will stand corrected then.
Oh, I will stand corrected.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
You will stand corrected. I will not. I will do no such thing. So this brings me to an article in The Atlantic. The title is "Gay and Transgender Migrants Face Staggering Violence in Mexico." This article tracks essentially those bodies who are migrating from South and Central America up towards larger cities in Mexico, as well as into the U.S. And this branch, this humanitarian branch of the Catholic Church that runs 66 migrant shelters that are struggling with the increased movement and migration of out, or more visibly out, LGBT identified bodies and what to do with these individuals, focusing specifically on feminine masculine bodies or feminine male bodies, as well as on trans women. And this is part of that notion that like some of these missions have tried to create separate space rooms for LGBT identified people, but the rooms will not be used. And part of the reason for that is a misguided understanding, probably from a Western perspective, that if you have a separate space, then at least people will feel safe. But the problem with that is, as a migrant body moving through these spaces without a home to turn to that's more stable, without a safety network, if you're the body that's moving, you have nowhere to turn except to yourself. And marking yourself as queer in these rooms can hurt you, because now all of a sudden you're now moving with bodies that you're unfamiliar with. And now you're also marked as being queer in some capacity.
I think a part of me is sad to some degree to say that I am kind of happy that there are places like the Chicago House, that specifically identify as a transgender safe space.
But I think that is great for U.S. citizens. Yeah. I think that's great for folks who are living in Chicago. That's not the same as migrant bodies who don't have a space from which to, like an actual country that even they belong to. Like being caught in these spaces could harm you if you do not have documentation of even living in that space. It's easy for you to disappear, right? There's no trace of you. And so as a result, like there's one individual here in this story, Julio Campo, who is being followed here, or talked about, I shouldn't say followed, well, I guess in some ways being followed, and asked why he didn't use the LGBT safe space room. Well, it's because it puts him in a bad place. He has to try to blend in the best he can with the general migrant population so that he's not marked as an outsider until he can get to wherever he needs to.
Is he a trans guy?
He's a gay man, I believe, this particular story. But this is focusing on feminine gay men as well as... So those bodies who might be more easily marked as being what we in the U.S. would call queer, perhaps, or at least what you and I would call.
So it's the LGBT spaces that are kind of
it's scary. These LGBT safe spaces that are set up by the missions, largely by probably non-queer identified people who just say, well, if we make this space in the shelter, then
they'll be
everything's fixed.
safe. Yeah,
But it doesn't respond to the systemic violence. And so part of it is, yes, that's important to have the safe space, but it's also not about the individual. It has to be about how do we change the larger dialogue, right, around these different types of bodies that are trying to also traverse these spaces, usually following labor patterns towards places like the U.S. or larger cities in Mexico where they can find community, whatever that looks like.
It's a process to want to create these spaces because those spaces could put people at risk.
Yeah.
Those spaces could be attacked.
Yeah.
So before we start developing these LGBT spaces, are you saying that we should really be focusing more so on the general public and awareness? And
I think it's both and. I really do. I think that the safe spaces are interesting. I think that we can keep developing them. I don't think that we need to abandon them. Like the Chicago House here more locally is very important.
Well, like you said, I think here we're more ready for that kind of space.
I think that the missions in this story, I think it would do well to talk more to those migrant queer people and ask what they need as opposed to giving them what they think they need.
Right.
Right,
That's
I think that's one of the things.
That's a great way of looking at it. They need to be actually communicating with the community.
Right. So this brings us actually, let's keep it global here, if you will. We're going to turn our attention to Myanmar or Burma. What's going on there?
You know, Asian Human Rights Commission on Monday issued a statement condemning the alleged torture of gay and transgender people by police in Myanmar. Did you say? Yeah,
That's
this
right.
is. This was published on the 22nd of July, just so we know where we're standing. This is really frightening. A number of cases of alleged arbitrary arrests, detention, and torture of people on the grounds of sexual orientation is taking place. On the 7th of July, around 20 plain-clothed police and local administrators descended on the area outside the Sedona Hotel in Mandalay and assaulted a group of gay and transgender people there, pushing, hitting, and handcuffing and pulling off their garments in public before loading them onto a number of vehicles, the statement said. Once in custody, police continued to abuse the 11 detainees, hitting and kicking them constantly, stripping them naked in the public areas of Mandalay Regional Police Headquarters, photographing them, forcing them to hop like frogs. Wow, just humiliating practices. Forcing them to clean shoes and tables, to walk up and down as if on a catwalk, uttering obscenities at them, and otherwise physically and psychologically demeaning them. So this is what's happening to LGBT folks. So, a lot of this is kind of surrounding these really kind of inherent anti-transgender laws that are present in these locations where folks past a certain time can't be dressed up or in any way disguised. So although many of these people that were detained are later being released without charges, some have been threatened with and others charged under the 1945 Police Act Section 35C, which stipulates that any person found between sunset and sunrise, having his face covered or otherwise disguised, who is unable to give a satisfactory account himself, may be taken into custody by any police officer without a warrant, and shall be punishable on conviction with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 months. Some of those who are being released are being forced to sign pledges beforehand that they will not go to public places as they did before or wear women's clothing. So this specifically seems to be attacking trans women again. It also urged the legislator to amend the Police Act Section 30C. Yeah, it's
yeah.
So they're asking for some kind of amendment of this.
Yeah, to basically change this law here, and it's we'll keep following this as best we can when we get more information out of Myanmar or Burma. But this type of legislation is really indicative of colonization and bringing in Western modes of what gender is supposed to look like, and these policies that really kind of match up with this is what one is supposed to look like, this is how one is supposed to perform, and it becoming part of penal code in such a way that it looks like as though this is, quote, the way it's always been.
Right. I got confused for a second because I was just about to talk about the AHRC, which I mentioned in the beginning, is the Asian Human Rights Commission, and they're the ones who are trying to amend this police act that is saying that you can't dress up, between those certain times, and that you're it's just inherently an anti-transgender law. It's
Now, I believe the Mandalay Bay Resort in Las Vegas, Nevada, is framed after the Mandalay here.
Sure.
And I wonder if they're going to do the same thing in Vegas. That's supposed to be a joke. It didn't work very well, did it?
No,
okay.
You're okay.
All right.
I'm not laughing. I'm definitely laughing.
So we have 2 more stories to get to in just a bit of time. So we're going to move into real quickly here, kind of switch some gears here. This one's brief. The transgender. Okay, so there's an organization, an online community called Transgender Student Rights, or TSR, a really large organization that's really developed over the years in terms of creating a really strong network of online community building for trans students and where it is and what it is that they can access at their relative schools. Well, interestingly, GLESN, or the Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network, a very large organization who has really increasingly moved towards supporting gender identity and trans bodies and trans students, has joined forces and has consumed, if you will, or brought TSR on board with their legislating body. And so the Transgender Student Rights Network is now a part of GLESN, which what I'm ultimately getting at is it's a larger broadening of the community umbrella. I do worry if TSR will lose some of its trans focus and some of the specific needs of trans members that are part of this community, but that's something that's we're going to have to wait and see with time ultimately.
I want to move back to our last article here. Is titled Transgender Teen Settles Landmark Health Case. Now we're always, and this is a constant problem in the trans community, is how health centers are helping us and how they're not or are working with us respectfully.
Yeah.
An 18-year-old college student who grew up as a girl and now identifies as a young man has settled a landmark civil rights case against Kaiser Permanente of Colorado. In the rare case, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission found in March that there was probable cause that Mickey Alexander Manigault suffered discrimination and unequal access to health care, specifically because he is transgender. On the same day, after pressure from advocates at One Colorado's Division of Insurance issued a bulletin and became the 3rd state in the country to specifically bar health insurance companies from discriminating against people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. So, of course, there is a response.
Yeah, and that's really huge here about broadening the discrimination, particularly against queer bodies.
Right.
That's great.
Faced with charges of unequal treatment, Kaiser Permanente quietly settled Manigault's case before it was slated to go to hearing in June.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have a few minutes left on our show. We'll be back this afternoon between 4 and 5:30. We may continue these same dialogues. We might find new news. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do then, but we're going to leave you with a song by Justin Bond called American Wedding. The lyrics come from black gay activist, poet, artist, XX Hemphill, who died from AIDS complications, mixed with Justin Bond's music. Justin Bond is a trans-identified individual, artist, lounge singer, cabaret singer, really wonderful, beautiful vocals. We're going to hear that. Be sure to check us out on Facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. And if you have questions, if you would like to be interviewed for your work, email us, betheberadio@gmail.com.
Thank you for tuning in. This has been Aria and Benny.